Yeah, it is. And you can't... One thing you shouldn't do, particularly for me when I'm doing a Richmond game, is just don't look at Twitter, right? Because we know you get feedback on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So I often get Richmond supporters having a crack at me on Twitter saying, why are you going the reverse bias against Richmond? You're overcompensating because you don't want people to think that you're biased towards Richmond. You're too hard on Richmond. Yeah. And then I'll flick down a couple more tweets and it'll be the supporters of the other team that I'm commentating and they'll be saying Richardson's a disgrace. He shouldn't be commentating on Richmond games. So I'm like, which one is it? So it is tough. Look, I think I do find myself in a Richmond game probably a little bit trying not to pump things up too much. Whereas if the opposition do, maybe I do that because I'm trying to compensate because I don't want you're doggies, man.
Yeah.
I don't want you as a Dogs fan thinking I'm biased towards Richmond or vice versa. So
there is a couple out there that are a little bit biased.
It can be tough. Yeah. It really can be. So particularly the finals and doing I've done the Richmond grand finals and particularly 2017. I actually didn't say much that day because it was just Timmy Watson was sitting next to me on the boundary. And if you listen back to the call, I didn't add much. I shouldn't have got a paycheck that day because I didn't say much at all. And I think it was because I wanted Richmond to win desperately. You know, the drought breaker, I hadn't seen any success in my time as a fan. So
you had every right to have that day.
So I really did just turn up and watch the game that day.
As a fan.
Yeah. I did.
Has it ever slipped out? Ever? Like, does something come to your mind where you've accidentally barracked or...
I did. There was a game in Adelaide in 2000... Which year was it? Richmond needed to win the last 9 or 10 games of the year to make finals. They couldn't afford to lose one game, right? I think they were 3-9, right? Or 2-9 or something like that. And they had to win 10 or 11 games in a row to play finals. And they got on a run and they did it. Yeah. But towards the end of that year, they played a game in Adelaide and Dustin Martin was one out inside 50 and he worked his opponent under the ball as we know Dustin can do. Yeah. Picked it up, ran in, bounced, kicked a goal and you knew that goal was the sealer. There wasn't long to go. And we've got a mute button in the commentary box, right? And I've gone to press the mute button because I went like that. And I didn't press the right button.
Oh, no, Richo.
And it went to air. And
who was commentating that day?
I got smashed on Twitter. Well, would have been Bruce McAvaney. Yeah. And I think Dennis was still commentating then. Oh
gosh, it'd be hard not to.
So that day I mucked up and there were plenty of Adelaide Crows supporters who heard it and said Richardson's barracking on air. So
was Bruce forgiving?
That was, I don't even know if they even noticed.
Yeah.
You know, but I knew.
See, I think you could be forgiven for that. I mean, I think we all
knew
love
that I'd done it and people at home picked up on it. So anyway.
What was it like, I guess, commentating alongside some of those names? I mean, you got to play with some big players. You probably now get to commentate with the biggest names, you know, that have ever been on AFL commentary.
Look, I guess early days, you know, working with Bruce and Dennis because, you know, my entire career they were commentating games that I was playing in. So, and they were the iconic callers. I think you could pretty much in my time following footy, they're the two biggest callers the game has seen. I mean, there were others obviously before that were iconic, but Dennis and Bruce are the two. So to then get to work with them, it was pretty daunting, to be honest. I mean, when I first started, you basically... You don't have a lot of training. It's just, you know, they throw you in front of the camera and see how you go, sink or swim, right? Jeez. And the first probably couple of years working with those guys, it was quite daunting because they're so good at what they're doing. They're such pros at what they're doing. And I was learning on the job. So you didn't want to make a mistake and you didn't want to bring the broadcast down because you weren't as good as what those guys are, and you never were going to be as good as them. But I did find myself as nervous broadcasting with them as any game of footy, and not because of anything they did, just because I was in a bit of awe of what they'd achieved and what they did.
Yeah, because what we hear a lot of too is that players that come out of the game and go straight into the media, they have this sort of conundrum where they don't want to be too hard on a player because they understand how it feels, but then if you're not being controversial, you're not actually like. There's a fine line between...
I think my biggest advice to any player coming into the media is just be yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, if you start being someone that you're not, I think people at home know that.
Yeah.
I mean, Pete. So, and you got to be true to yourself as well. So that's the advice I got off some past players when I first started. Just be yourself.
Yep.
You know, and I think if you be yourself, people, even the players know. If you're fair but you're being yourself, I think players know when a little bit of criticism is warranted. And when I say criticism, you just point out something they could have done or something they could have done better. But I don't think try and create something that's not there either. Don't try and be a jock type of situation. I just try and be myself. And look, I'd probably still try and see things on the side of the player probably more because I know how hard the game is to play. I think you've got to remember that. It's such a hard game to play.
Do you have, you hear stories about how some of these commentators, you know, there might be a young person coming through and they actually are so giving to the new person. So they will actually make you sound like the expert. I think I heard Hamish McLaughlin talk on a podcast called The Imperfects with Hugh Van Cuylenberg. And he shared a story about Bruce around, they were doing the tennis and Bruce said to him, mate, Leighton Hewitt's never lost. I can't remember the specific stat. Yeah. But on air, he goes, Hamish, you just told me that Leighton Hewitt, this stat, but it was Bruce that told Hamish that stat.
100%. I mean, I've worked with quite a few guys now in the media, and they're all great. I mean, I've got along with everyone. I mean, I've enjoyed everyone that I've worked with. But that would happen regularly with Bruce. He would come in to the commentary box on a Friday night at the MCG. You know, I might be talking about the Collingwood forward line, and Bruce would come up and say, hey, Matty, down on the boundary line tonight, I might come down to you about Jamie Elliott, right? And then he'll give you a stat or something about Jamie Elliott, and he says, I reckon you should say this, you know? And it's something that he has researched, right? But then he's given it to me to use.
Wow, that's amazing.
He's one of a kind. I mean, I'm not. It's not disparaging to anyone else to say that most other guys, if you go and do your research during the week and you write a few things down, you're probably keeping them for yourself to say, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Bruce would write things down but then give them to the rest of the team because he wants the team to be better.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised Hamish has that same story, yeah.
It's amazing.
And that happens quite regularly with
amazing.
him. It did, yeah.
How did you go back in the day when you were playing? How did you go with criticism in the in the papers, for instance? When you read that, did you read it? And if you did, was it motivating? Did it piss you off? How'd you go about it?
Well, firstly, when players say they don't read or hear things, mostly they're telling a fib.
Yeah.
Because I think they do. And it's impossible now with the world of social media to not see that feedback. So, yeah, I went too far with it. I mean, I used to log on to fan forums and read everything.
Really?
Right? Yeah. Read everything.
The real nuffy kind of.
Yeah. I'd get on Big Footy and have a look at what was saying. But
Really?
I did it for a bit of positive affirmation at times.
Okay, cool.
You know, there's no point logging on after you've had a good game if you're not going to log on after you've had a bad game.
Yeah.
And I found myself doing that too much and worrying about what too many people said. Probably wasn't until my late 20s that I realised that it just wasn't helping. It wasn't good for my mental state. It wasn't good for my game preparation. So probably worked out later in my career, just worry about what your teammates and coach think. Yeah. And don't worry about what Johnny Smith said on Big Footy or what Mike Sheehan or, you know, whoever it is, Caroline Wilson, whatever they're writing in the Age or the Herald Sun. So I tried to ignore it more as my career went on, but I admit 2/3 of my career I looked at too much probably.
Yeah, okay.
Probably just... It motivated me at times, but it probably flattened me out at times as well.
So were you ready at pre-season for Mike Sheehan's top 50, you know, where you'd rank in that?
I wasn't happy where I was most times.
I don't know. I can't remember. So we're, like, obviously we love a bit of PlayStation. We only play FIFA majority of the time. But did you do special comments on an AFL game at all?
I did.
How was that experience?
It was hard work because you had to go in and it was probably 3 days work in a studio. And you just had to repeat certain words and phrases and sentences and numbers over and over and over and over again so that they had everything logged in to the game. I mean, I don't know how they put it all together. It's phenomenal what these guys can do creating video games. But it was a long process. Yeah. And it felt very unnatural.
Were you there with, like, Dennis? Or
no. So Dennis had recorded all his lines in Perth in his own studio. And then I had to go in and record the special comments in another studio. Yeah. So you're sort of trying to repeat these lines and sound enthusiastic. And I think that sounded shit out, to be honest.
Well, we bought it, mate. So
And I've had many people say
Really?
how
Yeah.
poor it was.
Oh, really?
But when you watch it and you